What's up, you guys? Welcome to episode 431 of the Established Run NBA podcast. I'm Mike Gallagher here with Drew Dinkmeyer to talk two up-and-coming teams with the Rockets and Pistons playing really great basketball. The Rockets just tearing it up, running through the Western Conference. Another big win last night against the Jokic-less Nuggets. Big wins against the Grizzlies, and the Pistons pulling off some really big wins against good opponents. We'll also talk about the Nick Richards trade from the Suns. We'll talk about if that was good or bad and how it could help or not there. So, Dink, exciting topics here. How are you feeling today?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. It's always exciting to talk about some of the teams that maybe the national media coverage isn't as focused on that are having really strong seasons, and some of the maybe underlying storylines of those strong seasons. In this case, two twin brothers who are making a big impact in the league. Were both drafted in the top 10 of their respective draft class in the Ausar Thompson and Amen Thompson twins. So we got some trades. We're going to have more trades coming in the next month or so to analyze and talk through. So it's a good time of the year to be able to talk about basketball as people's attentions start to drift towards the NBA, drifting a little bit away from football, a little bit towards the NBA over the course of the next 6 weeks.
For sure. And also the Thompson twins tie-in and the top two picks of the 2021 NBA draft with Cade and Jalen Green as well, who two players you were like, kind of like not into. A lot of
For
people,
sure.
myself included, Jalen Green, we were always poking holes in, but they're playing really good basketball right now. So let's start with, I would say, the more impressive of the two, who's actually leading the NBA betting market in most improved player. That's Cade Cunningham. Just an incredible player right now. Staying on the court, the most important thing. And we talked a lot about this, how his role was so big and how he had the pieces to be a really good offensive player. But it's translated to offense. And in their last 12 games, they're like a top 10 offense. Like I think they're 6 in half court. They're playing with pace. They're playing with, good shot diet, all that good stuff. We'll talk about their defense too. But Cade and his impact on offense is among the best in the NBA. I mean, to be a top 10 offense without tip-top talent next to him is really impressive. So what have you been seeing from Cade to make him take kind of another step here?
Yeah, so looking back over the first 3 years of Cade's career, I was certainly very critical of a couple different things. One, the shooting prowess that we had expected to come out of college. He was kind of billed as like kind of a high-end shooter, wasn't really showing up. He was just 33% from three. And then his finishing at the rim also lagged behind a little bit in terms of players that have come from college to the pros that were drafted at his level, just typically were better rim finishers as well. Last year, he started to take a step forward in terms of his free throw rate and getting to the free throw line a little bit more. That helps on the efficiency from a scoring side of things. And the three-point percentage jumped up to 35% last year. And it's like, okay, now we're starting to see some signs of growth. Well, this year, it's turbocharged. He's up to 38% from three. And I think if you look at the difference from this year compared to past years, I think there's a building of skill sets that we're continuing to kind of improve over the course of the last 3 years for Cade Cunningham, and now supplemented with space around him to operate offensively. And I think if people want to be critical of my critiques of Cade Cunningham, the thing that you could be most critical of is the fact that, adjusting for context, right? The fact that they weren't playing with a lot of space. He wasn't playing with a lot of strong other offensive players that created space for him and made the game easier for him. Now he's got the space. They're not exactly elite players that are helping make the game easier for him, but Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr., Tobias Harris are all creating more space than he's operated with the last few years. And with that space, he's been making much, much better and more effective reads on traps, on pick and roll coverages. And I think a lot of that is just built up reps in terms of having all the reps through the first 3 years. And as you mentioned, been able to stay healthy, has played 36 of the Pistons' 40 games so far this season. That's a big improvement from the previous 3 seasons where he played 62, 12, and 64 games. So a lot of improvement in health in terms of pick and roll coverage identification and reading those coverages and getting the balls in the right spot. And a lot of that was also facilitated by the team just creating an environment that was a little bit more helpful to him in terms of having more space, because he had the ball in his hands plenty the first 3 years, but now he's having the ball in his hands and he's taking his own improvements and layered on this extra help by having more space around him to operate. And it's led to an efficiency boon. 38% from three is a career best. 49.7, just teetering on 50% from two is a career best. He's actually dipped a little bit at the free throw line in terms of his make percentage to below 80%, but I'm sure that'll rebound. And then you've got career best in terms of all the passing metrics as well. So it's been just an incredible season for Cade, and I think deserving of being the favorite for most improved player.
Yeah, and to that point, so pick and roll plus passes. Last year he was 0.96 per possession. This year he's 1.1, which is better than Dame, way better than LaMelo, better than Trae Young. A little bit on par with Jalen Brunson. Like he is like one of the best pick and roll handlers in the NBA. He's shooting better off of it as well. His jump shooting is up substantially, like almost 7 effective field goal percentage points. But his actually rim finishing is like still about where it was. That would kind of be the next level. And I talked about this a lot with Dame when he was starting to become the guy. He was actually worse than Cade is, but that's a pretty big part. But yeah, this team is just waiting on Cade, and giving the big contract. It's like really paying off there. But besides Cade, we'll get to Ausar. We get to Ausar now. Should note there. So you would think injecting Ausar into the starting lineup, I think it's a 61-minute sample. You would think, oh yeah, they're going to be way better for defense. They've been great. They're 12th in offensive rating with that lineup so far, partly because of Cade, as I mentioned. But Asar's defense hasn't had the impact defensively yet, but their offense has really been clicking. What about Asar's impact on this team, whose minutes have been way down? Blood clots, had an illness. It's taking a bit. We saw him get 26 minutes last game. But how do you think Ausar Thompson fitting into this team could kind of make them take another jump?
I think the big, you mentioned it hasn't kind of helped on the defensive side just yet, but I think that's an area that you look at kind of this starting unit and Jalen Duren, Tobias Harris, Cade Cunningham, Tim Hardaway Jr. It's positionally above average size, and that's one thing when you talk about finishing between Cade and Dame that's different. Is Dame's only 6'2", about 200 pounds. Cade's 6'6", 220. So like Cade should be finishing better at the rim than he is, but that is the next leap to be able to make. That they're positionally big, but they're not particularly great defenders individually, those four guys. And so just having someone that can be your lockdown kind of point of attack defender would be a big help in terms of kind of improving the defense as a whole, because this is still a young team that they've gotten better defensively at just like kind of better, cleaner on rotations, communicating different things like that. But they're still a young team. They lack kind of elite defensive upside. I think against the really good offenses, I think they can struggle. So I think Ausar gives them just a freak athlete, as LeBron James referred to these guys, that they're just like different animals compared to everybody else in the NBA. And having that athleticism can help a lot on the defensive end in terms of creating havoc with steals, blocks, and different things. And then that can help on the offensive end get you into transition more. And Cade is a very effective player in transition, but if you look at the players around him, Jalen Duren, not known for kind of busting it down the court and beating guys down the court and getting position and helping out in transition a bunch. Tim Hardaway Jr., just kind of a flare out guy for transition. Tobias occasionally will get his in transition, but there's nobody really to like run and lob with Cade. And that's where Ausar can kind of come in, that freak athleticism, being able to wreak havoc on the defensive end and turn that into easier offense. Also rebounding, like the Thompson twins, both of them have been exceptional rebounders whenever they've been on the floor. And the combination of Jalen Duren and Ausar Thompson as a rebounding duo can take pressure off of some Tobias Harris, off of Tim Hardaway Jr. He hasn't rebounded very much at all this year anyway, but take pressure off of those guys and get those guys out into transition a little bit more, because you can feel more comfortable that you can grab most of the defensive rebounds with Ausar and Jalen Duren. So I think it just allows for a little bit more flexibility in kinds of their approach and the way that they can play. And I think it should ultimately lead to better defense and more transition points, which should just make things a little bit easier for Detroit, which every little edge that you can get in terms of making things a little bit easier when you're kind of a fringy playoff team is just really, really helpful. And so, I think over time, Ausar should be able to take more and more of this role.
Yeah, for sure. And then, I mentioned they've been better on offense. Hey, they're still 12th in defense over this 12-game stretch where they're playing. So they're playing better than average defense. And it's part of scheme, too. I don't want to tie that to Bickerstaff, but we'll in a bit. But I want to talk some more players. Is there anybody else that you think, like Tim Hardaway Jr. has been playing 30 minutes night in, night out, Malik Beasley doing the shimmy a couple times, hitting some big shots. Who else do you think, besides Cade and potentially Ausar, is kind of another reason why. Is it just Cade, or is there anyone
I
else?
think it's mostly Cade. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we can do the trolling of the Philadelphia fan base and say that, look at Tobias Harris's record
Mm-hmm.
with
Mm-hmm.
Philadelphia and without Philadelphia. I think there is something to Tobias as a teammate, as a veteran presence, as a leader, and also that he's sort of like a no, you know, there's not a lot of maintenance needed for Tobias Harris,
Mm-hmm.
just generally. And I think there's something to be said for just having players that there's not a lot of maintenance for in terms of like the smoothing of the ride of the NBA season. So I think he deserves some credit on that front, but I don't think he's played at his highest level this year. I think they've run a little bit hot just in the sense that when Tim Hardaway Jr. and when Malik Beasley have been hot has been at separate times. So they've always kind of it seems like for the last month, they've just had one of these guys flame throwing, and that makes things a
Mm-hmm.
lot easier. But no, I think most of the growth this year is on Cade's shoulders. I think he's been that good. I think this is a little bit reminiscent of what you see in the early days for like a Luka or a LeBron, in terms of they can just elevate everybody around them offensively because of their ability to read pick and roll coverages and just be an offense unto themselves, either getting themselves shots or setting up teammates shots. And the offensive responsibility, the workload on Cade has been ridiculous. So I think most of the credit here from a player perspective goes to Cade Cunningham. And as someone who's been critical of Cade Cunningham's development in the first few years, I can happily take that L this year. He's been fantastic.
For sure. And then I did want to tie into Bickerstaff here, who their pace they play on offense, they've been, as I mentioned, their offense has been better than Boston's offense in their last 12 games. We'll talk more about Boston in the content for sure. But playing pace on offense and then playing better rim protection. That was, I mean, how many times were we saying, hey, play this big, play this power forward against the Pistons because they can't protect the paint. So there's some credit to that. A little bit of credit to Jalen Duren for their defense. Obviously,
Yep.
Cade's not helping him there. So Jalen Duren, who was maybe a bottom 5 center defensively last year, he's gotten better there. But credit to JB, credit to the Pistons and the front office, adding in these pieces. We all thought that it was terrible to get rid of Quentin Grimes, up and coming player, to get Tim Hardaway Jr., which you could still kind of debate Quentin Grimes playing well, and Tim Hardaway Jr. We were like, oh yeah, just get him off the team and then play Ausar more, and then Beasley, cheap kind of hometown contract. So credit to the front office, credit to Bickerstaff to get this team to go on a record run of losses in a row to be this team. Credit to Bickerstaff, who is getting shots thrown at him, and as he should somewhat,
Yeah.
since the Cavs are so good. But anything, just a style of play and just team synergistic aspects. They're just put together
Yeah.
like kind of really well to pieces around Cade, as you were kind of hinting at.
Well, I would say something about Bickerstaff is those Cleveland teams, they always had cohesion. They always seem to like playing with one another. They seem to enjoy playing basketball together. I think he brings that positivity and that energy. And I think that's happening in Detroit, a team that like a lot of times last year when you watch, they didn't look like they were playing basketball in a joyful way. It looked like a take turns kind of way. And certainly that is some of the criticism of the Cleveland offenses in the past, that it was a little take turnsy and there wasn't a lot of innovation and a dynamic approach to it. But I think with Detroit, because it's been so clearly Cade and it hasn't have to been a take turns, everybody's kind of fallen into line. And I think JB does a good job with kind of the culture and keeping people happy there. And I think generally he's been a pretty good coach defensively in terms of the little things and the details. Obviously, it helps having Evan Mobley and Jared Allen back there as defensive anchors, but those Cavs teams were always pretty good defensively as a whole. And I think this Detroit team has taken a step further without a lot of improvement from roster in terms of defensive talent. And I think that can mostly go to buy-in and effort. Like a lot of defense is effort and attention to detail and preparation, right? Like that's 75% of defense. And then the other 25% of defense is like individual skill set, athleticism, anticipation, different things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that 75% has gotten way cleaned up in JB Bickerstaff's tenure in Detroit. And so that makes them like, if you're top 10 in the league at that 75%, you're a top half defense,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think JB's kind of like elevated them to a top half defense by just having them kind of prepared and playing with attention to detail, and taking advantage of kind of players communicating a little bit more. They've just looked better defensively and more locked in during the course of the year. And obviously, Jalen Durden, we're seeing this with Mark Williams. Some of these just gigantic athletic freaks at center can have a huge impact on the game when they are playing within control. And you're starting to see that on Mark Williams' side. On Charlotte, we'll talk about the Nick Richards trade in a bit as well. But you're seeing the same thing with Jalen Durden, where he's playing with a little bit more control defensively than he had in the past. He was a little bit like chasey in terms of trying to find everything. And there were some Andre Drummond esque moments of early Andre Drummond in terms of like, God, this guy can grab every rebound, but he's trying to chase every block shot and he's giving up a lot of offensive putbacks. That stuff has slowed down for Jalen Durden a little bit this year. Still some issues with foul trouble that he needs to work through.
Yep, that happened again last game. But yeah, they went from basically a bottom 5 rim defense to like a top 5 rim defense. It's pretty rare with the same personnel. so it's pretty crazy that would happen. So a little bit of credit to Duren on that side of the ball there. Any other points you want to make? And then I know you have your plus 400 ticket that the Pistons make the playoffs. It's looking pretty good. They're in that 7-8 range, closing the ground a little bit on. They're right behind. Game and a half out of the 4 seed. Playing well, 8-2 in their last 10, their last 12. I think they're 9-3. Does this team? Should it be like even money at this point? Like they're playing great, and a lot of teams aren't even close. Like the Sixers aren't even close to them right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, they've got a 5-game lead in the loss column on Philadelphia. And at this point in the season, we're almost halfway through the season, and we just have not seen Joel Embiid be able to sustain any sort of health. And if he's not able to sustain health, there's a big question mark over whether Philadelphia can make up 5 games. Philadelphia's impending schedule is also brutal, absolutely brutal in terms of road games, higher end teams. And so I think there's a legitimate case to be made that Philadelphia is really mostly competing for the 10 spot in the play-in. And then from there, if you're Detroit, you're like, how do I get into the 7 or 8? Because if I'm in the 7 or 8, I just got to win 1 or 2 games to get into the playoffs, right? Well, Miami's got a lot of dysfunction going on with their situation with Jimmy Butler as well that looks like it may not be able to be resolvable during the course of this season. And if that's the case, then all of a sudden now you're looking at, okay, if we're able to say we're ahead of Miami, we're ahead of Chicago, we're ahead of Philadelphia, then we're in the 7-8 range, and we've only got upside from there. We're half a game behind Indiana, a full game behind Orlando, but just 2 in the win column, tied in the loss column. Those are teams that Detroit can be on par with. So I think it's starting to look like a little bit more like even money, maybe even a favorite to kind of get into the dance this year for Detroit, which is just such a huge step forward from where they were. I think their win total coming into the season was in the mid-20s, low 20s. So like just an incredible rebound of a season for Detroit, and finally some optimism for a city that's like seeing the turnaround right on the football side with the Detroit Lions. It's nice to see the basketball side kind of come around as well.
For sure. And the Houston, they've got some good stuff going on for some sports teams. Let's change gears to them. And man, this team's playing well. I have said on the content that I've won more money betting OKC. It's getting pretty close with how much money I've been winning on betting the Rockets lately. They play so hard. They're 9-1 with Amen Thompson in the starting lineup. They don't miss Jabari Smith one bit. So let's just leave with Amen. I mean, this guy's playing 40 minutes night in, night out, making life hell on John Morant, had 7 turnovers, made life really tough on Jamal Murray last night. Actually, Amen played a pretty poor game last night. Had a couple really sloppy turnovers, looked gassed for once. Maybe it was altitude. But like just this Amen starting lineup, they just run so fast. They put so much pressure with Amen on the ball. Now you got Brooks off as a wing. Şengün's defense has been better. Fred VanVleet's no slouch. Jalen Green actually cares on defense now. And they've got depth at on-ball defense like all over the place. We'll talk about Whitmore. We'll talk about everyone. We can talk about Jalen Green. Like it's just like you can't say a bad thing about anyone on this rotation right now. Who do you want? Do you want to start with Amen, who's just been crazy, or you could talk to Jalen Green if you want to, get that out of the way.
Full capitulation show. No, we can give me the intermediate break with talking on Amen since the machine was on Amen Thompson coming into the season.
Big L in for terms the man of over there, by the way.
In terms of Amen, it's such a fascinating player in terms of like his style and his approach to the game. If I told you that a guard that shot 68% from the free throw line and 25% from 3 could be a dominant NBA player in today's NBA, and maybe dominant is aggressive, but I think that's where we're trending for Amen Thompson. You'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, the league, you need space, you need shooting, you need to get that space and shooting from your guards. And if you're not getting it from your guards, how are you going to run kind of a successful offense? And so it's so interesting to see. And it's so interesting to see him with Alperen Şengün, when you would have looked at some of Şengün's weaknesses and been like, that guy's a little bit flat-footed. He's not going to be able to rim protect and different things. And look at how well these two pair together in terms of how much they support each other. Alperen Şengün's playmaking allows Amen Thompson to be in the dunker spot a lot and allowed him to be an offensive weapon because of his ability to cut and finish at the rim. His Amen Thompson's ability to protect the rim allows Alperen Şengün, who still has pretty good hands, much like Jokic we've talked about in the past, to be playable defensively because he's got so much help from the point of attack defense with Amen limiting stuff at the rim, but then also the help side defense from Amen able to protect at the rim as well. And so it's just a fascinating player to watch in terms of his ability to really make an impact on this team and get them out in transition and run. His ability to be dynamic playmaking in transition as well kind of opens up a bunch of stuff. So yeah, he's a fascinating player to watch. And because he's so stylistically different, like if I asked you to compare Amen Thompson to predecessors, I don't know that there's a name that I could come up with. You could say like Jason Kidd in terms of the way that Jason Kidd impacted the game from a defensive perspective, getting into transition, rebounding. Amen's a better athlete than Jason Kidd in a pretty meaningful way. And Jason Kidd and Jason Kidd towards the end of his career developed his jump shot, so he was able to kind of work from there. But Amen is like, so it's like Russell West, it's like tall Russell Westbrook, like long Russell Westbrook. It's just it's a very interesting player in this modern era where shooting has been so highly emphasized. For this guy to be such a non-shooter and it really not matter, I think is fascinating and cool. And in a league that is being covered in a way that's like, we're taking too many 3-pointers and all these different things, I would love to see more coverage about how incredible Amen Thompson is without the 3-pointers impacting basketball games. Like, why don't we talk about that more? So that's what we're here to talk about today, is to celebrate how incredibly impactful Amen Thompson is without the 3-point shot.
Yeah, a name that when you were talking there, the first name that popped in my head didn't have the passing acumen that Amen has. First name I thought of instantly was Gerald Wallace. Like a guy that's just hair on fire all the time, steals blocks machine, runs in the open floor, crazy athlete. He just defines the way your defense plays, and that's how Amen's playing right now. But Amen's just way more talented, and Gerald Wallace couldn't shoot either. So I don't know. It's so fun watching that guy. Just like every year I do the top perimeter defenses pod. Like I don't know how anyone beats Amen, man. That guy it's with the defense behind him. He's been so good. So. Yeah, if the shot ever comes, and who cares if it does, because Jalen Green's shooting the ball well, Fred VanVleet finally shooting better on threes, and then Şengün, who cares? He's just such a good ball distributor right now that everything's clicking. But let's shift to Jalen Green. I mean, my God, he is just on a tear right now. Night in, night out, they're giving him the offense now. He's been out driving, out touch timing, out pick and roll handling, everything on Fred VanVleet. This month he's at 30.6 points per game. Is it March? What is going on here with Jalen Green?
He is just one of the streakiest players in the entire NBA. And so because he's been such a streaky player throughout his career, I've had a hard time adjusting to what is new. What is the new normal for Jalen Green? And here we are again in January. And through 7 games in January, he's got a 67.7 true shooting percentage on a 29 usage rate. He's averaging 30.5 points a game, 4 boards, 2.5 assists. And we have seen months like this before from Jalen Green. And so I still don't know, is this the new normal? Is this just another hot streak for Jalen Green? Because if you look back over time, like last March, 61% true shooting percentage, 27.7 points per game. And then it was like back to normal in April, small sample. But then at the start of the season, it was kind of back to normal. In 2022, 2023, we've seen it. Now, this season is a higher peak, right? It's 67% true shooting percentage. It's 30 points per game.
Mm-hmm.
It's also, once you've seen a couple of these sustained periods of performance, you start to believe like, oh, okay, he's able to tap into this a few different times. What happens when he starts being able to tap into this like consistently? Is this the time that he's able to tap into it consistently? But you look at the holistic level of this season, and his stats look exactly the same as the last two seasons. Like they look very, very similar. He's 43% from the field this season, was 42% last year, 42% the year before. He's 21.3 points per game this year. He was 19.6 last year, 22.1 the year before. He's at 4.5 rebounds per game. He was at 5.2 last year, 3.7 the year before. It all looks the same. But in these little windows, he ascends to this other level that you're like, my God. And so that's the question: is the ability to keep showing a month or two of this at a time just a hint of the future of, no, this is going to be the next step in his development? He's just 22 years old, so like there's a lot here to really like, and the ability to sustain that performance, even if for a month at that level. That performance that we're talking about for the last month has been like Anthony Edwards-ish in terms of like the impact that we've seen offensively. So yeah, I'm intrigued by Jalen Green. I still don't really know what we have here, but I know that this player that we see for a month each part of the year is an absolute problem for everybody in the league. And if we start seeing it for 2 months a year, 3 months a year, 4 months a year, then we're talking some serious potential for Houston on the high end, because they need somebody to ascend to high end score crunch time playoffs, right? We haven't even seen them in the playoffs yet, but they need that ascension. And it's probably not going to be Amen, right? With his offensive limitations. It might not be Şengün because he's still struggling with efficiency stuff, even though he's been able to pile up volume. So is it going to be Jalen Green? And his performance in pick and roll and different things that he's been able to attack, especially against drop coverages and guys going downhill, has been really impressive this year.
Mm-hmm. I was looking at his March last year and opponents, like Wizards twice, Utah twice. Like all the bad teams were just in there, and like he put it on Dallas. He had a good game against Boston. He had 2 great games against Memphis. Killed Denver without Jokic, but he still was really efficient in light time. Like this isn't like schedule. Yes, the Wizards are in there, but like he isn't coasting on schedule. He's just playing at a really high level. So as you noted, like, can he sustain this? To his credit, he's been very durable. So they have that in their favor too. But I want to talk Şengün next, and I want to talk like a little bit of defense. We know he ended his season last year with the injury, and he's come back way better. Just as a post player offensively and just rim protection. I've talked about this. Houston's first in rim defense per possession, and obviously scheme, obviously all those athletes, obviously all the just stop and ball and transition defense is part of that. But you're not first unless your center can protect the paint. So that on top of just overall strong, just being stronger. Rim finishing has been like kind of meh. He's only 55% on layups this year. But what have you been seeing from Şengün? I should mention conditioning too. Like he doesn't look tired. How many times did I talk about Udoka calling out conditioning? I don't think I've heard it once this year. So just looks more well-rounded this year after the breakout last year.
He often gets compared to Jokic because of some of those similarities, right? Some of the similarities in the playmaking, some of the similarities with some of the conditioning challenges, some of the similarities with lack of verticality that brings into question marks about rim protection and different things like that. What we've talked about in terms of Jokic's defense in the past that has been so effective, even if when he hasn't been a good rim protector, is he's defensive rebounded and he's created steals in a big way. Now, Alperen Şengün's rim protection metrics are, much, much more compelling than Nikola Jokic's. I think part of it is all the help kind of in front of him. There's always Dylan Brooks. There's always Amen Thompson. There's Jabari, Tari. Those guys can protect the rim as well and stay in front of guys as well. So I think he's been it's been a very well constructed group put in front of him to hide whatever the limitations are. He has good hands, which can create steals and passing lanes and deflections. And he's gotten better at being positionally sound and just not giving up stuff in a way that Jokic got better over the years as well. And if you want to talk about Jokic's ascent defensively in terms of when he went from bad to average or slightly above average defensively, it was also when the conditioning got under control. And I think that's the same path that we're on for Alperen Şengün here, who again, only 22 years old. So the it's just really, and whenever we talk Rockets, I got to shout out Sam Jeffrenia on our Win Totals podcast, talked about the Houston Rockets over 43.5 being one of his favorite bets this year. Talked about having all the alts on Houston, division futures, best record futures. This was the team that Sam was in on in a way that I did not see it. But look at all these like young early 20s guys blossoming in a way where their growth is coming together. You've got the veteran leadership of Fred VanVleet, Ime Udoka. And yeah, Şengün's been great this year. I still think some of the comparisons to him with Jokic are just far-fetched. Yeah. Like they're just not the same quality of offensive player. Like Alperen Şengün does not have the same quality of touch as Jokic. I don't think he will ever be that kind of offensive player. He's a career he shot the ball 27% from three in his career. Like they don't have the same level of touch. Jokic is a much, much better passer and feel for the game. But in terms of being an offensive anchor and a centerpiece that you can work people around, and especially maximizing talent of cutters, that is very valuable. And with Amen Thompson specifically, Alperen Şengün is a great pairing to maximize those two strengths, because I can envision so many other centers that Amen Thompson could be playing with right now that in the half court, he would struggle to find a role offensively, that he's able to find that role playing alongside Alperen Şengün because of Alperen Şengün elevating Amen Thompson's threat with passing. And so I think that two pairing as a combination has really been something that in some ways they've sort of lucked into with the Jabari Smith injury in terms of being able to test that at a bigger clip, because it's really made a big difference in a way that Jabari was still helping Şengün a lot on the defensive side, and his floor spacing was helping Şengün offensively. But I don't think Şengün was helping Jabari as much offensively as he's helping Amen. Mm-hmm. And I think that pairing has really, really been great.
Yeah, for sure. So just as a random note, while you were talking about Joker, who lost his lead for 3-point percentage, Domantas Sabonis passed him quietly. So the top two 3-point percentage leaders are Sabonis and Jokic. Guess how, I'm not going to say guess. The number one Rockets player where he ranks in 3-point percentage is 75th. Dylan Brooks. It's just crazy that this team just wins on just beating you to death with defense, playing faster than you, putting pressure on you. I think they had 34 points off turnovers last night against the Nuggets. They just put you in possession. I think they're first in possessions per game. They just play the math game the way we're not used to talking about the math.
Yeah.
Game. It's just a unique style of basketball that is really fun there. And it's just like, you just dream about this, that all your young players just fit so together with the way they have a style of play that is so unique. I mean, look at all these other teams that are in the top of the standings that you just scream offense, right? They're the only team in OKC too, but I think OKC's style is a little bit different. But yeah, and they play fast too, but and they also just more talent offensively. But yeah, shout out Houston, and got a shout out. You mentioned Cam Whitmore. So Udoka says last game that Cam Whitmore has, quote, better overall consistency, and he's playing more efficient, and he's running like crazy. We talked about this, how his pace on offense really adds another layer, because they are a pretty bad half-court team, which is changing pretty rapidly here as they're putting up better scoring numbers here. But if you want to shout out Cam or anybody else that has really taken a step forward, Dylan Brooks even, he's first in the team in 3-point percentage. He's been great. Anybody you want to shout out as well?
Those guys are great names. I just want to reiterate once again, if we want to talk about how basketball in the NBA right now can be very entertaining in a way that's different, and you see different types of teams, and you're tired of seeing uniform styles of play and teams chuck up 3-pointers and stuff, the Houston freaking Rockets. Let's talk about the Houston freaking Rockets more. They're shooting 33% from three. They're not beating teams at the 3-point line. They are just a defensive menace in terms of their ability, and they're piling up possessions, as you alluded to, steals, blocks, rebounds in a big way. They're not letting you get as many shot attempts as them, and they're going to overcome the math game by that, and then they're going to get to the free throw line as well. And so I think they're such a unique, fun team to talk about in a way that we're talking about so much uniformity in the game. They are so different, and let's celebrate that.
Yeah, they are. They're fifth in total possessions, but they have such a gap on their opponents that it's been really helpful for them there. But yeah, where are we at here? Like, is this team? And actually, one last point. I mean, when the chips are down, man, they usually show up. They are 9-1 in their division. I just looked it up. The one loss was against the Spurs early in the year. They've gone 3-0
Yep.
against the Grizzlies, 2-0 against the Mavericks. When the Mavericks have been pretty healthy, they had look out for one, but they're healthy in the other one. Like, they have the tiebreaker over the Grizzlies right now. Like, they have such a position to be number two. Is that where they're at? Like, how like I know Sam has a division bet. Like, I would feel they had the tiebreaker. That's so big. Like,
Yep.
are they going to be the number two seed? I feel like pretty strongly they are.
I agree.
Yeah.
We're halfway through the season, 3 games in the loss column, up on Denver, 4 games on the Clippers and the Lakers, or 5 games on the Clippers and the Lakers, 4 games on Denver, 3 on Memphis in the loss column. It's not nothing to overcome, and especially with the tiebreaker there on Memphis. And I think just like they're doing this largely of late without Tari Eason, without Jabari Smith, without depth, and we're talking about their lotto pick, Reed Shepherd's now in the G League. Like, they have reinforcements that can get better. They have assets that if they want to move pieces to like tighten up other pieces on the roster, they can get better. So yeah, I feel pretty confident in Houston, and I think they're going to be a team that is going to be a tough out in the postseason in the way that they're kind of like, I think they're this year's Minnesota in some respects, in terms of like the young, hungry defensive team that you worry about how things are going to go in the half court offensively when the playoffs slow down and when teams aren't turning the ball over as much. You wonder how this team is going to be able to thrive, but they're so physically tough defensively that if the whistles are swallowed a little bit, they will beat you into submission. And that's sort of what happened with Minnesota as on their run through the playoffs last year. I see a lot of similarities between Minnesota last year and Houston this year.
Yep, 100% with you there. So let's close and talk about a trade from the Phoenix Suns, acquiring Nick Richards, who, interestingly enough, they played against them twice, the Suns and the Hornets there. What do you make of this? Obviously, Nurk has been DNPCD, has been called out with an illness.
Yeah.
Certainly, he's been catching all the flack, as he should. He's been terrible. But what do you make of this move overall? I've got some thoughts, but I'll hand it to you first.
Just desperation.
Yep.
I mean, just really, really desperate. I don't want to, knock Nick Richards as a player in a meaningful way. He's been a reserve center that's been effective as a reserve center. When he's been a starting center, he's been okay. And he's, a big body who's improved kind of finishing and his ability to rebound the basketball. He's not the most durable guy, hasn't been able to hold a ton of minutes. Mm-hmm. In a lot of ways, to me, he's like a better version offensively of Mason Plumlee, who already they've given up on to some extent. Like, they gave up on Nurk. Now they're struggling with, Plumlee and Oso. They kind of game to game. It's like so it just is it's like another body. A roster with 4 centers makes no sense. So something else has to happen in terms of a move here. But ultimately, like, it just screams desperation. And the Nurkic contract, I imagine, is going to be difficult to move. So, like, I have a hard time thinking that the ultimate ceiling of this team is better with Nick Richards than it is with Yusuf Nurkic playing. I know Nurkic has been terrible this year, but I believe firmly that Nurkic is a better player than Nick Richards. So I just look at it like, oh man, they are hurting if they think this is going to be the ultimate solution. But obviously, if they can get better production out of that position, maybe they can make a jump forward, because Kevin Durant and Devin Booker are playing well. But it's been the same case with Kevin Durant everywhere we go. He's playing well, the team's not playing well, and it's confusing.
I hate this trade. I think this is such a bad trade. Look at, like, Dorian Finney-Smith, nothing. Dennis Schroeder, nothing. The Suns just gave up like most of their kitty for like Nick Richards. He's fine backup. But like, he doesn't help you. You have all these. You have, like you said, he's like Mason Plumlee, but like maybe a little bit better. This style of play doesn't work. Like, they have just needing more spacing. They need to get the lane opened up for Booker, Beal, and Durant when they could all play on the court. This style just doesn't work at all. They tried jamming Nurk as a 3-point shooter, didn't work. They over and over how early in the season they were just jamming 3-pointers with Nurk and it wasn't working. And like, you need a 3-point shooting center in this league. And it's not like Nick Richards is not a good defensive center. And I don't know what they saw to make him think he is, because I feel like they did trade for that. I mean, how many times do we do NBA content for DFS and we're like, oh yeah, Nick Richards is starting, play your opposing center against him? Like, I don't know. I think I would have waited for something else. Clearly, they were just feeling the pressure. Desperation, great way to start. That's the only way this could be perceived to me. I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think Nick Richards is the type of player that raises your ceiling or floor or anything. He just helps you if you're like really dire. You need somebody to fill minutes here. I mean, he was losing minutes barely. He was like losing minutes to Taj Gibson at times. So I don't know. I think this is a pretty bad trade. And actually, I think less of the Suns for you just unloaded. I guess net 2 second-round picks. They got one back.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just think that this didn't help them at all, and giving up the opportunity cost of giving up those picks, I think really, really hurts. And I think Okogie's been like not bad either. But I hate this trade.
Yeah, fewer ways that they can play as well when they
Yep.
lose another wing from the roster. And then I would also say that like it's just a surprising haul for Nick Richards. So for Charlotte's perspective, like I cannot imagine that they thought they would get a net 2 second-round picks for like a Nick Richards. In terms of like, they must have been like, huh? Oh yeah. Oh, you can have Nick Richards. I think like when we've been talking about like hauls for like Vucevic, that's been kind of the price range people have been talking about, like a couple second-round picks, right? And obviously Vucevic has a more substantial contract for the next 2 years, but it's a surprising haul. And it also makes me wonder, like, what is going to happen in the trade market for Chicago, selfishly as a former Bulls fan, like with Vooch and Levine, because if the price on Nick Richards is 2 second-round picks, like it would seem, like, but that was also kind of the price for like Dorian Finney-Smith. So I'm kind of confused at what's happening here in the trade market. The Suns have confused things a little bit.
Yeah, like why couldn't they get Dorian? I don't know. I don't like if it would have cost me my extra second-round pick to get Dorian. I don't know the cap stuff, but like that trade, this is the worst trade so far. Like the Schroeder trade was way better. The Thomas Bryant Thomas Bryant would have been a better pick than Nick Richards. At least he spaces the floor. I just it's so bad. It's so bad. I don't know. They should just wait.
But quickly on it, fantasy purposes though. Big boon for Nick Richards, right? Like obviously they think they're going to start Nick Richards. We'll see how long that lasts in terms of his effectiveness. But when he's able to be out on the floor now, a big jump in value from what he was dealing with in Charlotte, where he was having a hard time taking playing time from Mark Williams. And then the Mark Williams ascension, the stock is, this might be the all-time high for Mark Williams stock after the 36-minute performance last night in Utah. But what fantasy thoughts do you have in fallouts from this trade?
I think he'll be fine. He'll be like, one of your bench pieces. I don't think I think he'll be like maybe top 120 value. Just he's not like a huge shot blocker. He'll rebound and score and field goal percentage, but I think there's like no ceiling. There's no usage either. Like they're not going to run plays for him. So I don't know. I think it's pretty gross. Like if you're in a 12 team, pick him up, sure, but it's pretty gross. And then the headline is Mark Williams. Like he's getting all the minutes. He smashed Walker Kessler last night. He had huge game against the Suns as well. Why not trade for him? I'm kidding, but. Yeah, I think Nick's fine, but I think if you have Mark Williams, that patience could really pay off here if he can stay on the court.
I would also say that I do not think this trade of Nick Richards from Charlotte's perspective is representative of a confidence level in Mark Williams' health. I think I think if they traded him for like 1 second-round pick, that would be that. But I think this is more value than we could possibly imagine getting for Nick Richards. So we have to make this deal. It could be both. It's not one or the other. It was certainly encouraging to see Mark Williams get up to 36 minutes last night. But I don't view this as like some huge indication from Charlotte that we're super confident Mark Williams is going to be able to play 30 minutes a night for the rest of the season. And that's why we moved Nick Richards. I think it's just, hey, we can get 2 seconds for Nick Richards. Let's do that.
Yeah, and there's been some commentary they could trade others, maybe Josh Green, maybe they could send for Seth Curry. So I think in the long haul and in the short haul, Moussa Diabate is going to be able to get, he'll be on a 2-way for, 50 games prorated. So he'll be, I think my case here is like they'll clear out roster spots and just convert Diabate, and then they've kind of are still covered. So yeah.
Maybe get a look at Salon at the center spot as well, potentially.
Yeah, that's probably like the headline to me. Like Nick Richards is fine, but keep an eye on Salon if you want to kind of stash him there. All right, anything else to mention to get us out of here?
No, appreciate you guys all tuning in. As always, if you're listening on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, would love to get a rating and review from you guys. That helps us continue to produce this content. And if you are interested in seeing the video version with our smiling faces, you can go to Established Run NBA on YouTube and check out the video version of this podcast as well. As always, we continue to churn along with the DFS side of things, the betting side of things. So all of our premium products can be found at establishedrun.com/subscribe-MBA for more details there. But really excited in general for the work that we're putting out, and really appreciate you guys supporting our content.
Yep, big weekend of hoops coming with MLK, a lot of day games, and only one night game for MLK Day with the college championship for football going on. So appreciate you guys. Catch you guys next time.